Championship has got 24 terrific teams competing for this season, all with a unique stadium. Today we're going to have a look at all 24 of the stadiums for the current 25-26 Championship roster, and we are going to rank them based on stadium capacity. So to make a note, this is not my personal favourite stadiums ranked or based on record attendance or average attendances. It's purely based on capacity. If you do want separate videos to rank stadiums on average attendances or my personal favourite ones, let me know in the comments down below and I will consider doing another video of that. But today we're purely basing it on capacity, and it should be a little bit of a good history lesson for all of us today as well. If you guys like what we see, please smash the like button. It really does help. If we can get to 30 likes, that'd be amazing. I've got to say thank you guys so much. We just hit 3,000 subscribers. This is the first video I'm recording since achieving 3,000 subs, so I've got to say thank you guys so much for the amazing support to get there. And now we just got to think of the next target. I think will be 4,000, hopefully then 5,000, and who knows, maybe I can reach the pinnacle and hit 10,000. You know, I can dream harder, but I got to thank you guys for making all of this possible. Following the fact I've just hit 3,000 subscribers, we've got a lot of new subscribers. So I'll give a shout out to Carol Sandland, Lucy Fry, Neil Walker, Mike Knight, Aaron Bradford, Tony's by the way, Alan Hale, Michael McBroom, and Aidan Y. Again, I always appreciate you guys supporting, subscribing, liking and sharing. It really does help. It really does help the growth of this channel, and I really do massively appreciate it. But with enough of that, let's start ranking these 25-26 Championship stadiums based on their capacity. Perhaps it doesn't come as a surprise, but last place in terms of stadium capacity in the Championship is the Racecourse Stockhay Ras from Wrexham AFC. It's the world's oldest international football stadium, which is something that I never realised, and it was a main, or still is, a big stadium in terms of Wales international football. And one really touching thing I found about this ground, it is actually the first stadium that hosted the first autism friendly football match. So I just think that's a really nice, poignant fact about this stadium. I think it was hosted in the middle of 2010s and stuff, so it's taken so long for that to be the case, but I'm glad that Stockhay Ras kind of actually thought of an innovative idea to start getting a bit more inclusivity for disabled supporters. And in terms of stand names, we can have the COP, the Wrexham Lager stand, the Stock Cold Brew Coffee stand, which was taken in the inspiration of the name the Stockhay Ras, which ultimately is sort of replacing the Racecourse ground name, and of course the Macron stand as well. So a stadium capacity of 10,771. You'd think if Wrexham can spend a couple of seasons in the Championship, this is their first season in the Championship since the rebrand, you know, you could see Wrexham easily get some opportunities to start thinking about extending the ground. They've got certainly the ownership and the support for it, so I certainly can see that capacity if there are plans being made to get more people in. That number could certainly start to rise in the next couple of years or so. The second smallest stadium based on capacity in the current Championship roster is Oxford United. Now, of course, this is their second consecutive season in the Championship since the rebrand as well, but they have been in the second division at least just before this century. Their stadium capacity holds 12,500 at this moment of time, and it was quite an interesting story based on how things were going. So their previous ground was based at the Manor Ground from 1925, and what you're going to hear a lot from teams moving from one stadium to their other one, especially around in the 90s and the early 2000s, there's something called the Taylor Group, which was introduced in to try and allow stadiums to be all seater based stadiums rather than having standing sections you would have realised that a big part of pushing this through would have been linked to disasters like Hillsborough, which we'll be discussing a little bit later on, which I felt was a bit interesting. But what I did find interesting, they did move into the Kassam in 2001, and actually their record attendance was when they were playing a match to survive in League 2 against Leyton Orient, I believe 2005 season, I think it was, and they got relegated, unfortunately. Leyton Orient beat them by 3-2. I think at the expense, it may have been Wrexham or Boston, one of those clubs who survived in their expense. Oxford went down and Leyton Orient got promoted to League One of that season as well. So a very dramatic final day of the season. But also there are some murmurs and rumours that Oxford are thinking of moving away to an all-new, wholly electric 16,000-seater stadium in Kidlington. So I do find that quite interesting, and the latest development of that is that in May 2025, so literally last month, short-term extension was agreed between the club and Fiocra Group to allow them to play at the Kassam Stadium up to 2028. So at least up to 2028, Oxford will be staying in the Kassam, but we could start seeing some developments starting to be put into place in the next couple of years or so. So certainly keep your eyes open to see Oxford potentially moving elsewhere. I think this is going to be a very interesting part in Oxford United's history. Completing the bottom three of the smallest stadiums in terms of a championship is Queen's Park Rangers, with Loftus Road having a capacity of 18,439. This is an interesting one, and I think I remember reading this fact when I was doing my football fairy tales. That's a shameless plug, which I used to do during lockdown. But they are the first professional football club to have an artificial pitch, all the way back, I think maybe in the 1980s when they had that. Now, in terms of developments, in October 2023, club announced a 3-year agreement to sell the naming rights of the stadium to Metrade. So Loftus Road really should be named as the Metrade Loftus Stadium, and that is going to be the case until this season, the 25-26 season. So I thought that was a bit of an interesting fact to throw in there, and certainly it's a ground where it has experienced Premier League football. They've moved into that ground since 1981, which I thought was quite interesting too. So certainly surprised me a little bit how low down it was. But then I think certainly remembering and seeing it from the Prem, it did look like a bit of a stadium a little bit out of place in the Prem. It was substantially smaller than a lot of the other stadiums that were around in that division. But certainly it's small, but it's also simple. It does have an element of charm into it as well. Next on the list is Millwall the Den. That has a capacity apparently of 20,146. Now, believe it or not, we're going to hear some teams who have moved into their current ground since the very beginning of their existence. Millwall are going to be one of the rare cases where they've moved so many times, but Den is actually their 6th stadium that they've occupied since forming Millwall FC, in around 1885. It's a very old football team, Millwall. Now, in terms of names of previous grounds, Stainfield, Glengall Road, North Nelson Ground, Athletic Grounds, North Greenwich Ground, and the Old Den, which was a part of their history for over 80 years, and actually they moved out of it in 1993. I think certainly would have been involved in terms of the Taylor Group project that was put in place there as well. In terms of stand names, they've got an east stand of the Den being renamed as the Docker stand, the south stand known as the Cold Blow Lane stand. North stand is typically for visiting supporters renamed as the Barry Kitchener stand as well. Certainly some very interesting facts to be put there from Millwall's point of view, and it is the 4th smallest stadium apparently in the current championship lineup for this season. Next on the table is Portsmouth. So they've got the 20th smallest capacity in terms of their stadium size. It measures at 20,899. This is the only football ground that Portsmouth have had in their history. So what a direct contrast. We were speaking about Millwall moving out of 6 named stadiums per se. Fratton Park has always been by name and has always been the stadium that Portsmouth has stayed at since, in their histories, which is insane. In terms of stand names, they've got South Stand, North Stand, Milton End, which was a renaming of one of their stands, and the Fratton End as well. So just a good example of a direct contrast in terms of how clubs have moved throughout their history. 19th place in terms of stadium size and capacity is Swansea, the Swansea.com Stadium, with a stadium capacity apparently of 21,088. So an interesting bit of their history. It's the first ever Wales Premier League stadium. So they got promoted under Brendan Rodgers in 2011, and actually since the Premier League rebranding in terms of the top tier of English football, that stadium, which was known by then as the Liberty Stadium, was the very first stadium in Wales to feature in the Premier League. In terms of how it compares to other Welsh stadiums as well, it's also the 3rd largest stadium in Wales as well. I'll leave you guys in the comments down below to see if you can identify the other 2 largest Welsh-based stadiums. 18th place in terms of stadium capacity is Watford's Vicarage Road, measuring at 22,000 in terms of their stadium capacity. So not a whole lot of difference from Swansea. It has been their home for Watford since 1922. They originally were in Cassia Road, so they moved from there to Vicarage Road. In terms of stand names, you'd certainly, I think, could make an educated guess for what one or few of them could be. You've got the Vicarage Road stand, the Rookery stand, the Graham Taylor stand, very famous in terms of his history, in terms of Watford. And then, of course, the Sir Elton John stand as well, being a supporter and obviously being heavily involved in Watford's movements as well. So it surprised me a little bit that Watford are also this far down, but I think 22,000 is a respectable amount. Certainly with Watford being not necessarily doing amazing in terms of their last couple of seasons or so, I feel like at this moment that they want to just try and regain some really, really good form. And it surprised me a little bit with the amount of years they had in the Premier League that maybe they did not think of trying to get more people in terms of having some more renovations. And if they did do renovations, they certainly were a little bit more behind the scenes stuff. But I think that's a couple of very interesting things that have gone around in terms of Vicarage Road. Next on the list is Preston Deepdale. So Preston, of course, one of the founding members of the Football League as a whole. So they are certainly one of the oldest clubs ever in terms of English football. Their stadium capacity measures at 23,408. So in terms of regeneration and renovations of Deepdale, 1995 was really the year where they started trying to add new things in, and certainly it would have been partly with the response of the Taylor Project as well. The old West Stand was actually demolished to make way of a new stand called the Sir Tom Finney Stand. So any Preston fan would be able to tell you the impact of Sir Tom Finney as a whole. So it doesn't surprise me that they have made a whole new stand after him as well, which, it's now 30 years old, which is absolutely crazy for me to think about that now. Next on the list is Hull's City MKM Stadium, which has a capacity of 25,586. We would know Hull stadiums have actually gone through a couple of name changes over the years. We've known it as the KC Stadium when they actually got promoted to their first season in the Premier League. KCOM was then adapted in 2021, so this would have been their first season, actually probably relegated to League One actually, and then getting promoted back to the Championship. And then as part of a 5-year sponsorship with MKM Building Supplies, that is why the stadium has been renamed to MKM Stadium. So interesting stuff again. So in terms of the KC Stadium, was completed in 2002. So this is actually one of those stadiums that was around, actually, is actually younger in age in terms of my age, which sounds crazy to think about it. But we have got a couple of Championship clubs that have had their stadiums built within the 21st century. I didn't mention it, but Swansea's Liberty Stadium would have been one of those types of stadiums as well. 15th place is Bristol City's Ashton Gate, measuring with a capacity of 26,462. Stand names in Ashton Gate include the Stand Lowdown Stand, you've got the Dolman Stand, the Yatea Stand, and the South Stand, of course. Now, in terms of renovations, they've actually had redevelopments all the way back in 2017. So pretty recent, you would dare say. It's nearly been 8 years since those developments. So they've done developments such as extending a stand. The Dolman Stand was extended by a little bit as well. You had other works in the ground with a capacity of 27,000 in terms of trying to get the capacity up ever so slightly there. Shifting the current pitch by 5 meters, which was enabling this Dolman Stand extension as well. So certainly a big part of the development was improving the Dolman Stand experience, and I think certainly by the sounds of it, they are definitely getting the best out of that stadium at the moment. Bristol City having a good season last year. Let's hope that stadium is still as booming as ever in terms of next year. Next on the list is West Bromwich Albion's The Hawthorns. So that has a stadium capacity of 26,850. So this has been the home of West Brom since 1900, the start of the 20th century. It actually is the 6th ground to be used by this club. So this is another one like Millwall, where they've been moving around, dotting around places to eventually find a stadium where they have stuck with. And it looks like the Hawthorns is a brilliant option that they have stuck with as well. Next on the list, so we made it to the end of the bottom half of the table, is Charlton, the Valley. So that's got a capacity of 27,111. Been the home of Charlton since 1919, which would have been the year after the First World War being ended. You've got stand names as the Covent End Stand, the West Stand, and you've got two, really big personalities in Charlton. You've got Jimmy C Stand, former manager of Charlton, won them an FA Cup, and the Alan Kirbishley Stand, which, if you're a football fan in the 90s up to the early 2000s, he was there for Charlton for 15 years and did an amazing job with the club as well. So no surprise of those stand names from Charlton. Next on the list is Carrow Road for Norwich. They've got a capacity apparently of 27,359. So this is not their first ground, Norwich. They originally played at Newmarket Road, eventually moving from the Nest, and then this was actually, they moved from the Nest because it was deemed inadequate for the size of the crowds they were getting. So whether that's too many crowds or whether it was too little, they initially then from that decision moved to Carrow Road. So it was just on the opposite road actually from when they were in the Nest, and it was amazing. They actually built it in 82 days, which was absolutely amazing, and opened in 1935. In terms of stand names, you've got the Regency Security Stand, the Barclay, and you've got the Jeffrey Watling Stand and the South Stand too. It's a stadium I have walked past, and I gotta say, it definitely stands out. You could see it from when you're arriving on the train as well. The same applies for Portman Road as well, when I've seen that as well. But certainly, it looks very striking, and I think it's a really, really popular ground. Next on the list is Birmingham. We've made it to the top half. St Andrews has a capacity apparently of 29,409. So it is now starting to approach the clubs in the high 20,000s in stadium capacities. And from the next team onwards, we're actually going to have 30,000 plus stadium capacities. It was constructed and opened in 1906. They were originally Birmingham in the Mount Street ground, so that replaced from that one. It became too small to meet the club's needs, so potentially that would have been something similar to what happened with the Nest for Norwich. It maybe wanted to grow and try to attract more safe crowds as well. Now, this is a bit of history for you. During World War II, St Andrews actually suffered bomb damage. I've not seen a lot of research of other stadiums suffering as much damage as St Andrews did in terms of the war as well. So a bit of an interesting bit of history from St Andrews. Next on the list is the only stadium I've actually planted my feet into. It is Portman Road for Ipswich. They have got the 10th largest stadium based on capacity in terms of the current championship teams with 30,056. That to me does sound about right. Where even when I was in the championship with them like 2 seasons ago, the sort of average crowd they would be getting will be in the mid-20s, if not the high 20,000s in terms of stadium capacity. And I can tell you this, it's very hard to find an empty seat, especially when I was booking tickets for the championship seasons. So certainly they've been booming in terms of getting people into their stadiums in their recent years, and because of their success, and that's no surprise about that. In terms of stadium names, in case you didn't know them, you had the Sir Bobby Robson stand, the Cobalt stand, which I was there when I saw Ipswich play against Barnsley in League One. They've also got the Sir Alf Ramsey stand as well. So they had Sir Bobby Robson when actually they renamed one of their stands after him when he passed away. Sir Alf Ramsey obviously was a major part in Ipswich's history as well, and ultimately there have actually been some small developments and redevelopment changes from Ipswich being promoted to the Premier League, which I'm really pleased to hear about, including actually new floodlight systems, changing rooms improvements as well, media facilities, executive boxes have been improved on as well. So I've been really impressed with that, and it's one of the oldest stadiums as well, with Ipswich occupying it since 1884, which is amazing. With only a 33 capacity jump, we jump to 9th place, which is Stoke City's Bet365 Stadium, measuring at a capacity of 30,089. Now, of course, it was previously called the Britannia Stadium, which a lot of people would have remembered it by, but it was since 2016 where the club entered into a new naming rights agreement with their parent company Bet365, which allowed the change from Britannia to the Bet365 Stadium. And it actually had expansion works completed all the way back in 2017, which would have been one of their last ever seasons in terms of their current history in terms of the Premier League. So it was a bit of a shame for them that they've not had too many seasons in the Premier League after those expansion works. It certainly would have helped in terms of their business. The stadium was built in 1997, so actually still one of the newer sort of stadiums in terms of recent championship history. We're now made to the top 8. 8th place is Blackburn's Ewood Park with 31,367 in terms of their stadium capacity. So quite a bit of a jump between them and Stoke City, of course. They've played there since 1890, a very iconic stadium, old as well. So 7th place now on the list, we've now made it to Sheffield United's Bramall Lane with a stadium capacity of 32,050. So the stadium was actually on a cricket ground named after the Bramall family in terms of they were gravel manufacturers actually, and this stadium, Bramall Lane, is the largest Sheffield-based football stadium, at least in the 19th century, because another stadium in Sheffield you'll see later on in the video does transit the stadium capacity later on. Now making it to the big guns, so top 6 now, it's Leicester's King Power Stadium with a capacity of 32,259. It opened in 2002, so another stadium opening in the 21st century. It was previously named as the Walker Stadium. Coincidence? I think not. Now, in terms of their previous stadium before 2002, it was by Filbert Street from 1891 actually all the way to 2002 when they did move into this new stadium. Now, in terms of the naming change to the King Power, that changed in March 2013 where the owners King Power purchased the stadium through their company King Power Holdings Co Limited. So it has been King Power for 12 years now. And starting off with the top 5 is the last relegated club, Southampton. St Mary's Stadium has a stadium capacity apparently of 32,384. And they have moved their Southampton to that stadium since 2001, another 21st century stadium. So in terms of the actual stadium size, it's actually the largest stadium apparently in the southeast, which I thought was quite interesting. So the main east stand named is the Itchen stand. The opposite stand to that is the Kingston stand. And then in terms of the other 2 stands, you've got the Chapel stand and the Northern stand as well. So Southampton are kind of in a position now where I think certainly they've got a really big packed out stadium now, and hopefully that they'll use it for what could be an absolutely electric season. So the next 2 stadiums on this list are actually pretty famous in terms of right or wrong reasons. You can make your mind up. But next on the list is Coventry's CBS Arena. So in London, it's the Coventry Building Society Arena, shortened to CBS, with a stadium capacity of 32,609, formerly known as the Ricoh Arena. So it was originally bought as a replacement for Coventry City's Highfield Ground. So it was originally owned by Arena Coventry Limited, ACL, with Coventry City as the tenants. Now, in terms of the history, Coventry have had to fight for this stadium, as we know. So there was a rent dispute between Coventry and ACL. Actually, they left in 2013 Coventry and played their home matches in Northampton before returning in 2014, and then they were brought out, ACL and Coventry, by the Wasps, and of course we knew the saga with them as well. We had further disputes in terms of the 1920 season. It saw Coventry leave the Ricoh for 2 seasons, and eventually Coventry agreed a 10-year deal to the Arena of Coventry. But the deal became null and void with Mike Ashley's Fraser's group purchasing that arena as well. So lots of background ownership issues in terms of this stadium, but Coventry are still, in that stadium now and are as happy as ever. And honestly, in terms of how much they're thriving, in terms of their recent success, I'm really, really pleased to see how many people are now really enjoying seeing Coventry in their original stadium. Now to the top 3. So Derby County has the 3rd largest stadium in the Championship with 32,926. It opened in 1997, replacing their previous stadium in the baseball ground. So this was obviously a famous stadium, and actually was partly due to a really big financial mess that Derby were in a couple of seasons ago. So of course Derby sold Pride Park to the club owner Mel Morris for 80 million, and it made profit, 14.6 million pounds of it, keeping the club with FFP regulations. And in terms of Derby, they later try and defend the value of the sale, and ultimately the punishment was actually for overvaluing the sale of Pride Park originally, and EFL dealt Derby guilty, breaching financial regulations in January 2020. It did result actually with other mitigating factors with COVID. Derby County entered administration, but Pride Park was not part of the administration since it was owned under the control of Mel Morris himself. So that made things so incredibly messy to try and buy the ground off him and then to sort Derby out. I smile about it now because Derby are absolutely thriving, but it was scary times where we were all just wrapping our heads about what sort of accounting treatment could we do for this to save it. But ultimately, it's a massive stadium, we can see from the stadium capacity, and I'm really pleased for Derby that they're now doing just as better as ever. They survived in the Championship last season, they're now picking themselves up and are now starting to thrive again. Just missing out on the top spot is Middlesbrough's Riverside Park with a stadium capacity of 34,742. Been the home of Middlesbrough since 1995, so again a relatively newer stadium, and actually would have been an active stadium in Middlesbrough's first couple of years in the Premier League as well. It was built to replace Everton Park following the publication of the Taylor Report. So the Taylor Report was a requirement for all top division football stadiums to be all-seaters. So you would have known from record attendances exceeding capacity, that would have been due at the time, that the rule wasn't, the report wasn't published at that time, and you would have allowed a lot of people to be standing in their stadiums. But we're going to soon find out from when that was the case, a terrible tragedy ensued. But well done for Middlesbrough for getting second place in terms of stadium capacity size. But there's no doubt about it that the biggest club in the Championship based on capacity size is Sheffield Wednesday's Hillsborough. I think the name itself is worldwide, unfortunately attached with a terrific tragedy in terms of obviously the Hillsborough disaster. Liverpool fans, would feel really traumatised about it with their semi-final FA Cup game against Nottingham Forest all the way back in 1989. And of course, the Taylor Report was actually published a little bit after that disaster happened as well. So the timing of it was just, if that report was maybe done a little bit earlier, you just never know that maybe this tragedy could have been prevented. But ultimately, what that tragedy in itself really pushed the Taylor Report to be put into place, and ultimately it just prevented people from too many people trying to be all crunched in and standing in the stadium, and ultimately that is what unfortunately happened, where you have lots of people being crushed around, unfortunately. So it's one of those ones which leaves a really sour taste to talk about, but you cannot deny that it's historic. Sheffield Wednesday Stadium is the biggest stadium in terms of stadium capacity in all of Sheffield. It was built in, I think, exactly 1900 actually, or 1899. So it was certainly around that region of time, and it's certainly famous in its own way, and it blows like second place out of order. I mean, that is what, a 5,000 increase from second place. So there's no doubt about it, but the biggest stadium in the current crop of championship teams is from Sheffield Wednesday Stadium, Hillsborough. All I could really hope is that the turbulence that Sheffield Wednesday are currently having with their ownership problems does get resolved, because with a stadium that size to maybe getting relegated to League One is a disgrace. They really need to hopefully just get things sorted off the pitch so that they can get things right on the pitch. Alright, and just like that, that is all of the championship stadiums ranked based on stadium capacity. Again, like I said at the start, if you want me to actually rank my favourites in terms of actual average attendances or attendance increases, let me know in the comments down below, and I'll consider doing that in the future as well. If you can like, comment and subscribe, it really does help the growth of this channel. And that will be it. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are legendary for sorting this video, and as always, I'll see you guys soon. Everyone, take care.